Morning, everybody. I would say good afternoon. We are 12:03. So today we are here for the PhD oral examination for Mr. Soroosh Shahtalebi. His thesis title is Towards Effective Application of Data-Driven Learning Models for Assistive Technologies and Brain-Computer Interfaces. So the examiner committee members include external to the university, Dr. Jen Wang from University of British Columbia, external to the department, Dr. Amir Asif, uh, uh, former dean and the VP research from York University, and from the department we have two examiners, Dr. Hamza and Dr. Nizar Bogolia, and your supervisor also, and myself, I am from the BCA department as a chair. So Soroosh, you have about 30 minutes to present your or highlight your contributions for your PhD, and then it would be followed by 2 rounds of questions. Dr. Asif, you are muted if you want to say something.
I just wanted to say that I also have a affiliate appointment with the electrical engineering and computer engineering department. So I think it's in that capacity that I am the examiner external to the department.
Okay. Extremely sorry for
No,
that.
just
I
wanted to
missed it. Yeah. Okay, so Soroosh, if you are ready, you can start your presentation. You have about 30 minutes, and then it would be followed by questions.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. Well, hello everyone. I would like to thank you all for attending my presentation, the committee members, my friends, and all other audience. The title of my presentation is Towards Effective Application of Data-Driven Learning Models for Assistive Technologies and Brain-Computer Interfaces. I've done this work under the supervision of Dr. Arash Mohammadi at Concordia University. So in my presentation, I will talk about, I will define the problem in hand with world aging trend, and then I will talk about the contributions of my thesis on the potential solutions for this problem. So the problem that most of countries and our societies these days are experiencing is aging. According to the statistics shown here by United Nations, in about 30 years, we are expecting double the population of seniors who are age 60 and above. And in about 8 years, we are expecting triple the population. So along with this aging, we have age-related neurological disorders that affect a considerable portion of a number of our seniors. And among all of neurological disorders, we have movement disorders that are the second most prevalent type of neurological disorders. And these movement disorders include Parkinson's disease and essential tremor. And so pathological hand tremor is a common symptom among most of the movement disorders. So, and if we look at the definition of the pathological hand tremor, which is here. So pathological hand tremor is defined as non-volitional and pseudo-rhythmic movements that affect coordination, targeting, and speed of movements in the patients, reduces the ability of individuals to perform activities of daily living, and affects the quality of life for patients. So in general, we are expecting a growing and expanding population of seniors who are going to be affected by pathological hand tremor, which affects the quality of their life. So to control this problem, from medical standpoint, a lot of research is going on in order to come up with therapies and medications to control this symptom, pathological hand tremor. From engineering standpoint, which is the focus of my research, there are three potential solutions. The first one is brain-computer interfaces, BCI systems. In BCI systems, in fact, a new communication medium is introduced to the human brain so that it can communicate with outer world by detouring the impaired neural pathways. so it can control prosthetics arms or computers. So the other solution is assistive and rehabilitation devices. In this category, the goal is to capitalize on the remaining functionalities of the limbs to assist with voluntary motions of the patients. So one example is shown here, the Google spoon. So as you can see, this spoon is designed for people with pathological hand tremor. So it's designed to compensate all the tremorous movements on this end in order to keep the food in the tip of the spoon in a constant position. And lastly, we have hybrid solutions that try to take advantage of the two solutions. These are often referred to as hybrid BCS systems as well. So moving forward, we have a motivating application, which is functional electrical stimulation. It's under the category of hybrid solutions. So the idea behind functional electrical stimulation is that we know that all these tremorous movements are produced by tremorous activity of the muscles that are involved. And all of those muscles are controlled by electrical signals that are sent by the central nervous system of the human body. So in FES systems, by injecting electrical current, the goal is to suppress the activity of those tremorous muscles. So here, the electrical current is going to be injected into the tremorous muscles, and we need to close the feedback loop here. And we use the two solutions that I mentioned earlier, the BCS system and PHT estimation paradigm for closing the feedback loop. In fact, BCS system helps us uh, understand if any voluntary motion is going to happen or not, and PHT estimation helps us understand to what extent the FES system was effective. And basically, like information fusion helps us fuses all of the information coming from the two feedbacks in order to fine-tune the parameters of the FES system. So talking about the BCS systems, here we have some fundamentals of BCS systems. They are typically built on these four blocks. So we have a pre-processing, and then spectral filtering, and then spatial filtering and classification. Basically, BCS systems are developed based on the plasticity properties of the brain. And so in BCS systems, our goal is to monitor the activities of the brain. And one option to perform this monitoring is electroencephalogram. Actually, EEG is our prime choice for the rest of this study because it's affordable, portable, non-invasive, and provides high temporal resolution with the signals. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the goal of this study is on movement disorders. So we need to monitor the activity of the brain in the sensory motor cortex of the brain. In that area, we have a nice property that actual movements and imagination of movements or motor imagery, they modulate the same neurophysiological rhythmic activities that are renowned as event-related desynchronization, ERD, and event-related synchronization, ERS. So the goal of the BCS system is to detect these two signatures in the EEG signals. And interesting item is that ERD and ERS, they are detectable in two different frequency bands. So moving forward, we have some fundamentals of the uh, PHT estimation techniques. So the main assumption in PHT estimation is that the tremorous signal, okay, so this is a tremorous movement, and this tremorous signal, we model it, which is really common in the literature as well, as an additive model. So it's a combination of a voluntary component plus an involuntary component. Involuntary is the tremor part, in fact. And this is the main assumption here, and based on some information from the literature, we know that normally voluntary component occurs in the lower frequency bands, and tremor component occurs in higher frequency band. So and this is also the inspiration for a lot of works in the literature that I will talk about later on. Here we have the comparison between a pathological hand tremor and physiological tremor. An important point is that the pathological hand tremor occurs in a wider spectral range. And the scope of this research is on pathological hand tremor. Moving forward, we have, okay, so here is the table of contents. So next I will talk about the contribution of my thesis towards EEG-based PCA systems. So looking at the literature of PCA systems, we were able to identify a few challenges. Uh, so the first one is that although ERD and ERS signatures are detectable in two different spectral bands, the cutoff frequencies of the mu and beta bands are not exactly the same for every individual. So the point is that the fact that we know that ERD and ERS happen in two are detectable in two different spectral bands has motivated a lot of works in the literature to come up with fixed filter banks with fixed cutoff frequencies in order to extract the signatures that we are looking for. But the fact is that we cannot come up with a filter bank with fixed cutoff frequencies for every individual. So to address this challenge, we proposed ECCSPECCSP.TB Framework, which optimizes a filter bank for each individual to maximize the classification accuracy. Then another challenge is that the powerful and well-regarded spatial filtering techniques are mainly developed for binary classes, while in BCI systems, we often need to handle multiple classes. So to tackle this, the spatial filtering techniques are commonly used, and one of them is a common spatial patterns, CSP, and the other one is Riemannian manifold learning. So these are mainly developed for binary classes. In order to take advantage of these spatial filtering techniques, we propose ECCSP and ECCSP.TB frameworks that decompose a multi-class problem into a number of binary classification problems. The next challenge for us was the potential benefits of decomposing EEG signals into several spectral bands to maximize the classification accuracy of the system often introduces high computational burdens, which limit their performance in real time applications. So, well, it's obvious that by increasing the number of spectral bands that are monitored at the same time, and then the number of parallel processing pipelines that work in parallel with each other, we are increasing the computational burden. So we propose a WCSP and wavering frameworks to address this challenge, and it performs a dimensionality reduction on EEG signals while decomposing them into several spectral components. Moving forward, we have the other challenge that we face is that limited size of EEG data sets, especially in MI studies, motor imagery studies, is a bottleneck in leveraging the superior learning capacity of deep neural networks. So to tackle this challenge, we have two contributions here. The first one is that we propose a Siamese neural architecture for motor imagery classification, which enables the training of deep neural networks over small data sets. And then we propose a novel objective function. We refer to it as MPCL for deep metric learning frameworks, which offers faster convergence and a better generalization over limited training samples. So as I move on, I'm gonna go through each of these contributions in details. So here is a EEG pipeline based on the first and second contributions. So first contribution was about optimizing a filter bank for each individual. So here is a filter bank that we have. We have a spectral filtering, and our goal is to optimize the cutoff frequencies of the two bandpass filters that we have here for this individual and to maximize the classification accuracy. And the second contribution was the part that we decompose a multi-class problem into a number of binary problems. So it's shown here, the ECOG classifier that we, for the first time, we uh, employed and proposed in EEG studies. So, and here are the abbreviations and their meanings. So the first contribution. In the first contribution, we try to optimize a spectral filter, a bandpass filter for each individual. So we define the cutoff frequencies of the bandpass filter as random variables, and then we employ a Bayesian optimization process in order to optimize these random variables. So the optimization is done through using a number of particles. So in each iteration of the optimization, we have a number of particles. Each particle represents the EEG pipeline that I showed you earlier. So in each iteration, the particles are going to be disturbed with random noise. I mean the cutoff frequencies. And at the end, a weight for each particle is calculated, and we have a threshold for the weights. If weight is above a certain threshold, we're gonna keep that particle intact for the next iteration, and the ones that are lower than the iteration, the threshold, are going to be redisturbed by random noise, and this process continues until we reach a plateau. Uh, so here we can see the results, the optimization results for one subject. So here we have used 40 particles in order to perform the optimization, and here are the cutoff frequencies that each particle has converged to. As you can see, these cutoff frequencies in average are representing the typical values of the mu and beta band that we know from the physiological background of the motor imagery studies. So this somehow approves, this actually approves the hypothesis and the assumption that we had when we wanted to start the study, that by using two bandpass filters, we hope that they converge to the mu and beta band that we are interested in. Moving forward, we have the second contribution. So as I mentioned, the goal here is to decompose a multi-class problem, for example, here, 4 classes, into a number of binary problems. So there are a lot of techniques in the literature: one versus one, one versus all, one versus rest. Here we use ECOG, error correction output coding. In ECOG, the classification problem is modeled as the communication of a binary code word over a noisy channel, where the noise contaminated bits can be recovered by means of information theory techniques. So so for a 4-class problem, we decompose it into 7 different binary problems. And for each binary problem, we form 2 supersets according to zeros and ones in each column. So we have a superset of zeros and superset of ones, and we perform the binary classification. For an unseen trial, we evaluated over 7 different classifiers that we have here. And we obtain a code word, and then we compare the distance of the code word, the Hamming distance of the code word, with the original code words that we have here, and we assign it to the class that has the minimum distance. And then we expanded this ECOG technique. We came up with the ternary ECOG code words. In fact, we are using ternary code words for defining our classes. We have zeros and ones and two. So we form the supersets based on zeros and ones, and the ones with denoted by two are not going to participate in the binary classifier that we form. So in this case, we have higher Hamming distance between original code words, which results in higher robustness against misclassification. So the third contribution of my work is there are 2 techniques, WCSP and wave RIM for EEG dimensionality reduction. So what we have done here is that we decompose in the 2 methods, we decompose the EEG signals into a number of detailed levels by wavelet transformations. And then we perform the spatial filtering. Here, the spatial filtering is CSV. Here is a Riemannian manifold learning in order to come up with a spatial filters. And we have a validation phase that in the validation phase, we select the level that provides us the best classification accuracy. So we denote it by L star. And then when it comes to testing phase and when it comes to the evaluation over an unseen trial, we only use the EEG signals in that level, in the L star level. So in this case, we have done the decomposition, we have obtained some prior knowledge, and then the classification is going to be on just only one of those components. So it has reduced uh, computational burdens on the system. Moving forward, we have the fourth contribution that we use Siamese neural architectures for EEG-based BCS systems. So in Siamese neural architectures, the objective function is a contrastive loss. As you can see here, in contrastive loss, the goal is that, so imagine we have an anchor and we have a positive sample. Positive means that they are from the same class. Negative means they are from different class. So the contrastive loss objective function forces the positive instances to decrease their distance in the feature space, and forces the negative instances to decrease their distance. So based on this objective function, we can train a neural network. And the goal here is that, I mean, the main idea here is that uh, in normal deep learning models, we try to learn generic features that try to uh, introduce each class. But in in Siamese neural architectures, and actually Siamese neural architectures are a subcategory of metric learning methods. So in metric learning in general, the goal is to learn features that discriminate classes. So we are not really concerned about generic features. We try to learn discriminative features. So yeah, so this is the fourth contribution. And moving forward, we have the fifth contribution. So in the field of metric learning, we identified a few challenges and a few gaps. And the most important one is that in most of the works and objective functions that are proposed in metric learning, Euclidean distance of the embeddings and or the dot product of the embeddings is used as a measure to measure the similarity or measure the distance. But the problem with these types of objective functions is that they are unbounded metrics. So when it comes to the back propagation, they can produce large variances that affects the learning uh, trend in the network. So here we are proposing the MPCL objective function. MPCL is based on cosine similarity of the embedding, so it's bounded. So the goal, the process is that we have one anchor input, and we have one positive instance, and we have one negative instance from all other classes. And when we feed it to the encoding network, we get the embeddings, and we calculate the cosine similarity between the anchor and all other instances. We have CP, C1 up to Cn minus 1. And here is the objective function. We have CP minus the average of the cosine similarity for all negative instances minus epsilon. So epsilon is a hyperparameter that we theoretically prove that it's equal to 1. So it means that our objective function would be equal to 0, which is the goal of our training, only in case that we have CP equal to 1 and the average is equal to 0, and we know that epsilon is equal to 1. So it means that upon successful training of a network, we will get embeddings that have orthogonal directions with each other. So here you can see the loss space for the MPCL. As you can see here in these regions, we have the regions that we can expect loss equal to 0. And this is often confusing for networks, sometimes fluctuating between this and this. Uh, and we had to bound our objective function. The way we bounded our objective function is that, well, we bounded the network. We actually forced the network to produce non-negative embeddings by using ReLU or a sigmoid activation function at the end. So here is the loss space when we applied this constraint, and the only L equal to 0 that we have occurs here. So when we force the network to produce non-negative embeddings, we are actually forcing all of the embeddings and features into the non-negative orthant of the feature space. So here we have evaluated MPCL over the MNIST dataset. As you can see, faster convergence and better classification, better generalization has achieved. We have achieved here compared with other works in the literature. And this is one interesting outcome of this research. So we have 10 classes in the MNIST dataset. We have obtained the average embedding vector for each class. So we have 10,000 instances for each class. We have obtained the average, and here are the averages that we obtained. So as you can see, it's all 0 except one bit, let's say. And it means that we have efficiently forced all of the embeddings into the non-negative orthant, and they have found orthogonal directions with each other, which is the goal of this objective function. Moving forward, I'm going to talk about the contributions of the thesis on PHT estimation and this block in the motivating application. So looking at the literature, we were able to identify two challenges. The first one is that emotional and physiological factors such as fatigue in the muscles change the behavioral patterns of the PhD over time. And thus, a simple filtering method wouldn't be able to keep track of the changes in the PhD and maintain its optimum estimation accuracy. So here, well, this challenge is with regard to the works in the literature that are inspired by the first assumption that I mentioned in PhD estimation. Uh, Actually, the second assumption, that the spectral contents of the voluntary and involuntary contents are somehow distinct from each other. So they came up with the idea that maybe we can use a filtering method such as low-pass filtering or high-pass filtering, depending on the application. But according to emotional and physiological factors, we know that PhD is highly dynamic and we cannot simply use those approaches. So we came up with a wavelet adaptive Kalman estimation, WAKE framework, which uses two multi-rate processing units, adaptively updates its parameters based on a recent behavior of PhD. Moving forward, we face another challenge that majority of works in the literature assume a known ground truth for the voluntary or involuntary components of hand motion, which we believe that it's not a realistic assumption. So this is one example of a tremorous activity, an action tremor signal. So we can do some sort of coarse interpolation between a start point and an end point, but we cannot for sure say that what was the voluntary component of this motion and what was the involuntary component of this motion. So this is a major bottleneck. To address this challenge, we propose the PHTNet, which offers a novel training mechanism based on pseudo-synthesized action tremor signals, which relaxes the need for any assumption on the characteristics of PhD. Here we have compared WAKE and PHTNet. As I move on into my presentation, I will talk about all these factors. Okay, so here is the WAKE framework. As I mentioned, in the WAKE framework, we use two processing units that run in parallel with each other. One of them is RTP, real-time tremor prediction. The other one is HPA, hyperparameter adjustment. RTP uses a Kalman filter in order to come up with online estimation of PhD. And HPA does some sort of post-processing on the last few seconds of this tremor signal. And it comes up with some parameters and then communicates those parameters with the RTP engine. in order to help the RTP to maintain its maximum performance. So here we have RTP and HPA in their algorithms. The point here is that in HPA we decompose the tremor signal into a number of approximations and details through wavelet transformations, and then we come up with a weighting vector that this weighting vector is optimized actually. This weighting vector tells us what should be the weight for each of those approximations or details in order to, when we combine all of those approximations, we get to the tremor component. Right, so we decompose the signal and we come up with some optimized weights that these weights tell us what should be the weight for each approximation, so that when we merge all of those approximations again, we are reconstructing actually the tremor component. And then these optimized weights are communicated with the RTP framework, and RTP is basically a Kalman filter that runs over the signal. Moving forward, we have the seventh contribution that is the PHTNet. As I mentioned, we are trying to address the unavailability of ground truths for voluntary or involuntary components. Here, our solution was using pseudo-synthesized action tremor signals. We have the procedure is that we recorded rest tremor signal. In rest tremor signal, it means that voluntary component is equal to 0, and we mixed it with a voluntary component, synthesized voluntary component. And here is a pseudo-synthesized action tremor signal. We feed this signal into the bidirectional recurrent neural network that is shown here. And so the output, we know that should be this. So we can confidently measure the error between the estimation and what it should be, and we can confidently train our network based on this error. So to develop the PHTNet, we use a data set that is provided by our collaborators from University of Western Ontario. In general, we have used 250 tremor assessments consisting of the kinematics of hand from 81 patients, PD and ET, in 3 trials and 7 tasks, and patients are evaluated. The acceleration of motion is measured with a 3-axis accelerometer mounted on the dorsum of hand. Okay, so here we have some simulation results that show how the input spectrogram is converted to the output spectrogram, or you can see the temporal representation. As you can see here, the high frequency contents that often correspond to tremors activities are vanished efficiently, and only the part that correspond to the voluntary component are maintained. So to perform some statistical comparison, we have compared the PHTNet with previous works in the literature, including our previous work, Wake, and we can see that we have improved over the validation test and validation set and test set. We have improved significantly. Here we have the comparison between the spectral density of the input and output pairs. Input is the red one and output is the blue or purple one. And you can see that, again, efficiently we have removed the spectral contents that normally correspond to the involuntary component. Moving forward, we have information fusion. So in this block, information fusion, one major requirement is that we come up with a solution based on the disease of the patient who is using the device. So we know that each disease requires a different type of parameters and hyperparameters for the FES system. So our system should be able to detect the disease. So, but well, that actually we can call it a disease-specific solution. But looking at the literature, we see that it's not a really easy task to accomplish. As you can see here, PD and ET share overlapping features, especially in the earlier stages of the disease. 46% of ET population show rest tremor, while ET is mainly characterized by action tremor. Up to 90% of PD patients represent action tremor, while PD is normally characterized by rest tremor. A considerable number of ET patients show asymmetric hand tremor, given that asymmetry of PhD is a signature of PD. And the problem gets worse when we look at statistics on the diagnosis in the physiologic in the by the physicians in the medical domain. So we can see that 37% of ET patients are misdiagnosed mostly as PD. 15% to 35% of patients are misdiagnosed as PD, and correct PD diagnosis rate for movement disorder experts and neurologists is 80% and 74% respectively. So to tackle all of these problems and in this challenge, we came up with the NeuroNet framework, which takes advantage of a two-stage classification paradigm to classify PD and ET patients based on the characteristics of their PhD. So our NeuroNet is consists of a convolutional neural network and classical classification techniques together form a two-stage classification paradigm. It achieves 95.55% accuracy, which boosts the state-of-the-art accuracy by 3.55%. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in the data set that we have 250 tremor assessments. Each tremor assessment contains recordings in 3 trials. In each trial, we have recordings for 6 different tasks, and each task is recorded by a 3-axis accelerometer. So we have by 3 axes, if we look at each axis separately, we have a signal, something like this. Each of these signals are converted to a spectrogram, an image, something like this. And then we feed this image to a convolutional neural network that we have designed here. This CNN model comes up with a decision whether the image, the spectrogram is PD or ET. As I mentioned, we have this amount of signals for each tremor assessment. In general, we have 54, we can obtain 54 spectrograms for 1 tremor assessment. So we collect all of these decisions in a feature vector, length is 54, and then we feed it to second stage classifier. So second stage classifier comes up with the decision whether the tremor assessment is PD or ET. So as I mentioned, the classification accuracy for NeuroNet is 95.55. Here is an important analysis, first visit accuracy. So for physicians, it's really important to come up with a confident and correct decision when the patient has visited the clinic for the first time. So because these are neurodegenerative diseases, and they get worse and worse over time. So timing is really important. So first visit accuracy is an important measure. We were able to achieve a 93% accuracy in the first visit accuracy, which is really good. And moving forward, because all of these deep learning models are still looked at as black boxes by the physicians and people in the medical domain, we had to come up with an analysis of explainability. So we looked at the regions that are important for the CNN in order to come up with the final decision, either PD or ET. So we looked at 3,000 instances for PD group and 3,000 instances in the ET group, and we compared these regions statistically, and we came up with these heat maps. So here you can see that PD group, the NeuroNet is, in order to identify if a patient is PD or ET, is mainly looking at the lower frequencies. And in order to come up with a decision if it's ET or not, it's mainly looking at higher frequencies. These results are, in fact, in confirming the prior knowledge that we have from the physiology of the tremor in PD and ET groups, that PD is normally lower frequency and ET is higher frequency. Here we have performed another analysis on the importance of the 54 signals that we have collected. One important outcome is that we know that we can see that even the least important feature can alone provide 76% accuracy for the classification of PD and ET. And we can get the result that rest tasks are mainly more informative than other tasks. So to summarize, here are the list of contributions that I talked about, and here are future research directions that I can foresee. So first is developing an efficient information fusion unit for the FES system, as shown in slide 5. I mean, completing the information fusion, collection of an inclusive movement disorder data set based on commercial general purpose IMU units, considering a dynamical model of upper limb motions for generating voluntary components of hand motion, developing a motor imagery based BCI systems based on Riemannian manifold learning, and approaching the filter bank optimization in BCI systems through gradient descent methods. So here are the references and the papers I published through my PhD, and here, and yeah, thank you so much for your attention. I would be happy to take your questions.